Welcome to Behind the Business, the podcast where we cut through the noise and get real about running a profitable business. I'm Pamela Hilton, CPA, with over 30 years in accounting, tax, payroll, and business advisory services. Each week, I will share stories from the field, answering real questions from business owners, and give you the straight talk you need to grow and protect your business. No fluff, no hype, just practical advice that works in the real world. So, let's get to it. Hey, and welcome back to Behind the Business. I'm Pamela Hilton, CPA, and this episode, I'm going to be going over 10 things that every business owner should know before it costs you money. Most business owners don't get into trouble because they're dishonest. They get into trouble because they don't know the rules. And you don't need to be a CPA, you don't need to be an expert, but you do need to understand the fundamentals of what goes on behind your business and the rules and responsibilities that you need to take on as a business owner. So today, 10 things serious business owners should know. Number one on the list is the difference between a 1099 contractor and an employee. And just because somebody is called a subcontractor, it doesn't mean that they are in the subcontracting business. That's just the terminology that's used to distinguish between somebody who's an employee and not an employee. So the key point is, if you control how, when, and where the work is done, you likely have an employee and not a subcontractor. And you have to remember that you don't get to decide whether somebody's an employee or subcontractor. The rules and regulations decide that for you. So when you are hiring somebody or bringing somebody into the business, or you need help with something, knowing those key things, the how, when, and where, will always kind of be your guide. And if you're not sure, talk to your CPA. There is a checklist on the IRS website, irs.gov, but check with your CPA. They can let you know whether this person that you're working with is an employee or a subcontractor. And it's so incredibly important, because if you do not put them on payroll, you run the risk of having them misclassified and having the IRS come in and reclassify them as an employee. And then you have to go back and file all those payroll tax returns for this person for a few years back. And then you're going to have penalties and interest on those payroll taxes that you never collected and paid along the way. So again, you don't get to choose. The IRS chooses for you. They have all these rules and regulations already set up. So knowing the rules before you even start hiring or using people in your business as an assistant or helping you with things is really critical before you even get going. And then just a little side note on 1099s. As a business owner, this is a routine you have to do at the end of every single year. You have to make sure that you do not need to issue 1099s. And I'm probably going to do a whole podcast on 1099s at a later date. But in general, if you pay somebody over $600 in a calendar year, not by credit card, by just paying them out of a check or cash or through your bank account, and that person is not incorporated, you most likely have to send them a 1099. So we do this with all of our clients, our business clients. We review their accounting and we see who they're paying throughout the year, and then we'll see if they need to issue 1099s. Receiving 1099s, if you're a business owner and you're expecting a 1099 from somebody, here's a real key thing about receiving 1099s. It should be irrelevant whether you get a 1099 from anybody. If you're doing your accounting properly and you have a solid system, you've already accounted for that income from wherever the source is. So you don't really need the 1099. It's not getting attached to your tax return. The 1099 system is just the IRS's way of keeping track of the people who aren't paying their taxes and don't have accounting systems. So you don't really need to wait on receiving 1099s from people if you have a solid accounting system and you're doing your own accounting properly. Okay, on to number 2, payroll rules. These are not optional. If you have payroll in your company, you really have to have a basic understanding of how, not to mention the labor laws in your state and the federal labor laws and minimum wage laws and overtime and paid time off and all of that. You need to know what taxes apply to you: federal taxes, unemployment taxes, state taxes, maybe local taxes. And you need to know when they're all due and what taxing agency all of those taxes need to be remitted to. Delegating the task of a payroll to a payroll company, a payroll processing company, whether it's a large company or small company, or you're doing it all on your own on software, doesn't mean you're delegating. The responsibility of making sure the taxes are paid, the filings are made, are still your responsibility as a business owner. So knowing what websites you need to log into to pay those payroll taxes, who the payroll taxes are going to, whether it's unemployment. Here in Massachusetts, you have to log into 2 different websites to pay your state taxes, the withholding taxes and the unemployment taxes. So knowing all of those things and having a list of the online payment websites is really critically important, because again, you can't delegate the responsibility. That responsibility still sits with you as the business owner. You're paying you're signing those payroll tax returns, regardless of who's filing them for you. So the other thing I really want to mention here when it comes to payroll and payroll taxes is you're acting as an agent for the IRS, collecting withholding from your employees and submitting it on their behalf, and the same with the state. You're acting like an agent for the state, collecting your employees' withholding and then submitting it every month or every quarter to the state. So if you are not properly paying those payroll taxes, the IRS and the state are very aggressive. That's not your money. You should be just collecting it and remitting it. So if you are not up on the payroll rules, what you're required to pay, and when the deadlines are to make those taxes and make those payments, they're going to be pretty aggressive with penalties and interest. Payroll mistakes I see in my business, my firm, payroll mistakes are really the quickest way to just tank your business, to really destroy your business. If you get behind, it can really compound and snowball very quickly if you're behind on not knowing what the payroll rules are, haven't paid them, thinking somebody else is paying them for you and they're really not being registered with the proper agencies before you even start payroll. All of those things. It's a huge responsibility when you're taking on payroll, when you're starting payroll. So make sure you're working with an expert. And I always tell my clients, even if you're outsourcing your payroll to a payroll tax company, to a payroll provider, your CPA should still be checking up to making sure you're complying with all of the rules, all of the things are paid for you, and everything balances out at the end of the year. All right, third, basic accounting. And I know this can be a source of stress for a lot of business owners, but you should have a basic knowledge of accounting and the processes and the systems that go into a good accounting system. Revenue doesn't always equal profit. Cash flow doesn't always equal profit. What is an asset, a liability? What is equity? What is basis? If you are a certain type of structure, entity like an S Corp or an LLC, you need to know what your basis is, your equity is in the business. What is a balance sheet? What's a profit and loss statement? You don't need to physically do the bookkeeping, but you should be aware of how all of the bookkeeping and the accounting work. You should have a basic idea of how the financial statements work, what's on the financial statements, how the information flows to the financial statements, and what it all means. And if you don't understand it, sit down with your CPA and have them do a brief overview of all of that for you. And don't be afraid to have an accounting system, even if you're not very knowledgeable. You still, as a business owner, need an accounting system regardless of your knowledge of accounting. That's non-negotiable when you have a business. And the other thing is, if you don't understand the accounting, it's going to be really difficult to pay yourself out of the business. So making sure that you have a basic level of understanding is just going to smooth out everything especially when you're just starting out. 4, record keeping requirements. In episode 10, I went over this in detail about what kind of records you need and how to keep them as a business owner. But just to recap here, you have to have certain business documents to back up what's going on in your business should you ever be audited, or if you need just a loan or for insurance purposes. Bank statements, credit card statements, loans for business equipment, line of credit statements, any kind of major purchase for equipment or vehicles, you need those documents. Amortization schedules, your incorporation documents, any partnership agreements, all of those things are key business documents that you as a business owner have to keep on your PC. Digital is fine. You don't need paper copies of these as long as you're backing it up and you have a digital copy. And what we do for us and for our clients and what we recommend is just set up a folder for every single year on your computer and just drop everything in there, your bank statements, credit card statements, and organize it by year. Screenshots, not the greatest because when you blow them up, sometimes they get distorted and you can't read them. But the bottom line is this: if you don't have documentation, you don't have a deduction. So making sure you're keeping that critical documents for your business, it can really make or break an audit. All right, number 5, know what taxes apply to your business in your state, in your industry. It's your responsibility to understand what your compliance regulations are for your business, for your industry. Sales tax, meals tax, road taxes if you have in certain industries, heavy equipment taxes, fuel taxes, payroll taxes, franchise taxes, the list goes on. And these will vary from state to state and from location to location. Every industry has different layers of compliance, and you need to be aware of all of those. And ignorance is not an excuse for non-compliance. It's your job as the business owner to be up on those things. You need to know what websites you need to be registered for to pay those taxes. When are these taxes due? If you are working in multiple states, if you have locations in multiple states, if you do work in multiple states, you have to know what those rules are with the other states. Do you need to file an income tax return over there? Do you owe sales tax? So knowing what industry you're in, what the regulations are, and what you need to comply with, it is really super important, because you don't want to be going back a few years in realizing that you should have been paying this tax all along, or you should have been registered with the state for this, that, or the other. Every industry unfortunately has different regulations, and every state has different regulations. Okay, number 6, your entity type matters. So whether you're a sole proprietor, single member LLC, multi-member LLC, C Corp, S Corp, all of those different entities have different rules for tax filings, levels of liability protection, whether self-employment tax applies to that entity, reasonable salary rules, what retirement plan is available to you if you're a certain entity, what annual filings are required by the state for that specific entity. And then at the state level, you have compliance issues. So knowing what your entity is, why you picked that entity, and should you make an election with the IRS to be taxed as a different entity, because your legal entity is one thing and your tax entity can be a different thing. So you could be an LLC as your legal entity, but you could be taxed as an S corporation for the IRS and for the state. This is where your CPA, a very experienced and knowledgeable CPA, is critical, because they can walk you through all of the different entities, whether it makes sense for you to be that kind of entity legally, tax-wise, compliance-wise, payroll, all of those things, retirement-wise. There's a whole strategy involved in selecting the entity. And if you're watching all of those videos on stacking, what we call stacking, making an entity for this and then having another entity underneath that, just keep in mind that every single entity you create equals a separate accounting system for that entity. You have to have separate records and separate accounting systems. So if you think it's overwhelming just being one entity and keeping all the records straight and the compliance and the taxes and the accounting systems, just think about multiplying that by having multiple entities. Then it gets a little complicated very quickly. Okay? Number 7, estimated tax payments. If you have been a W-2 employed by somebody else, and then you decide to open up a business, it may be a stark reality that now you are responsible for making sure you have enough taxes paid in. When you get a paycheck from somebody else every week, every time you get paid, there's withholding taxes taken out, and you really don't have to worry too much about your taxes at the end of the year because they're already taken out. But when you're a business owner, making sure you're paying enough income taxes can be a balancing act. And this, again, is why you really need a knowledgeable, experienced CPA to help you make sure they are creating estimated tax payments for you if you need them. They are sufficient to avoid penalties and interest. And are there ways that you can take compensation or pay taxes without doing estimated tax payments, i.e. creating payroll for yourself and your business? A lot of my clients just like the ease of just paying themselves a payroll check. We figure out what the holdings are going to be so they don't have to make estimated tax payments. So knowing if estimated tax payments apply to you and making sure they're sufficient is really, it can be, like I said, it can be really difficult when you're first starting out. In that first year, if you've blown it, you didn't take that into consideration, and it's your first tax return, and you have this huge tax bill, it can be really a little devastating. Most business owners, when they're first starting out, underestimate this particular point, the income tax portion of planning that and making sure that they're paying in estimated tax payments. And again, making sure you have a CPA on board can really avoid that whole sticky situation. Number 8, keeping your personal and your business separate. And this seems so easy, but it really can be very difficult, especially if you start out by using your personal checking account to run your business out of. It's a bad habit to get into, and it's a really hard habit to break. So keeping separate bank accounts, don't commingle things. The bigger your business gets, and if you are commingling, meaning you've got business income going into your personal account and then you're paying personal expenses out of your business account, it really can do so much damage and can expose you to a huge liability if you do that. So keeping things separate, learning how to pay yourself out of the business properly so that you have not only sufficient cash flow in the business, but sufficient cash flow in your personal finances as well. That's a balancing act that, again, a good CPA can help you out with. Making sure you have that all regulated. There's a huge strategy that goes into that. And especially if you are commingling things, you can what's called pierce the corporate veil, so to speak. If you have a lot of personal expenses going through the business, you've ruined the liability aspect of forming a corporation to begin with, to limit your liability. But if you're constantly running personal expenses in and out of the business, then the IRS can disallow that liability protection. Cash flow is king. This is number 9. And this is something that takes a little bit of finesse when you're a business owner to grasp how to manage cash flow. Because you can be profitable, you can have business coming in and still be broke because you're not managing the cash flow. especially if you're a seasonal business, especially if you have to keep inventory as a business. It's really difficult to manage having enough money coming in to cover the money going out and recognizing how much that is and what levels you need to keep in the bank account at all times to pay yourself, to pay the vendors, to make sure that you have your personal finances, like I said, are operating smoothly. And especially if you have a business where you have to have a lot of equipment, vehicles, fleets of vehicles, maintaining them, replacing them, all of that has to be considered when it comes to cash flow. And it's a lot of balls in the air to keep juggling. So it takes a little bit of experience to manage cash flow, especially when you're first starting out. So keeping that in the back of your mind when you are a new business owner, that you're going to have to manage cash flow, can really be to your benefit. All right, and the last one. You are going to need professional advice far sooner than you think you will as a business owner. Bringing on an attorney, a CPA, a financial planner, you're a good insurance agent, a business banker should be done at the very early stages of your business. Sometimes before you even incorporate, you will need a lot of these people on board. DIY works only when you're in the hobby stage, before you're making thousands of dollars, you're in the 4-figure range. When you get up to $10,000, $15,000, $20,000 you're making in revenue, you really need to start thinking about separating the business and personal stuff, and accounting, a real accounting system. You shouldn't think of your CPA as just somebody who's helping you file your taxes. They should be a trusted advisor, giving you all that business tax advice. And nowadays, there's fractional CFO services. You don't have to spend 6 figures to have a CFO or a very experienced accountant help you out with your accounting and your taxes and your business systems within your business. Having those professionals on board before you need them, vetting them, getting referrals, having that kind of all set up takes the stress out, because God willing, you have a really successful business. And once you start seeing some success, you're going to be a little too busy to take the time and mentally take the time to make sure you've got the right people on board. So that is really, in a nutshell, all the things you need to know as a business owner to make sure you have a solid business going forward. These aren't super advanced strategies I've talked about. These are just fundamental responsibilities that you have as a business owner. And the most successful businesses aren't the ones that are hustling and putting fires out all the time. They're the ones that have already anticipated where the fires are and put them out before they even get started. They have built their business on a really strong structure and foundation. Those are the most successful business owners out there. So keep all of these 10 things in mind when you're starting your business, or if you're an established business owner, like I said, check on to see if how many of those 10 things you're really doing. And that's it for Behind Your Business. Pamela Hilton here. If you are a business owner, share and subscribe. If you know a business owner who can help, you can help with this advice, share this video, share this podcast with them. Until next time. Thanks for listening to Behind the Business. If you found this episode helpful, please share it with another business owner who could use some real world advice. For free resources, tools, and to submit your own business questions, head on over to my website, PamelaHiltonCPA.com. Until next time, keep building smart and keep looking behind the business.